Hey lovelies, welcome back to Nellie Miss Love Stories. On today's story, Ira Hamilton, a fearless black American pilot from Maryland, is hired against her billionaire boss Choi Do-young's wishes as she proves her worth through unshakable calm during a mid-flight emergency, cracking open a connection neither of them planned for. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the story.
Choi-si, we have a cabin pressure issue. I need you to put on your mask, now. Choi Do-yoon.
How bad?
I have it.
That's not what I asked.
The oxygen mask dropped from the ceiling at 31,000 feet, and Aria Hamilton didn't flinch. She reached up, pressed it over her nose, and kept both hands on the controls. Choi SSI. Her voice came through the intercom, calm as still water over gravel. We have a cabin pressure issue. I need you to put on your mask. Now. Silence from the back. Choi Do-yoon. She heard the shuffle. The click of a seatbelt. Then his voice, low, clipped, the kind of voice that didn't apologize for taking up space. How bad? I have it. That's not what I asked. Aria pulled the yoke left, beginning a controlled descent from cruise altitude, her eyes scanning instruments with the practiced speed of someone who'd trained for exactly this moment 300 times before ever living it once. The Bombardier Global 7500 responded like it always did, heavy and honest, no lies in the way it moved through air. She loved that about it. Compressor failure in the pressurization system, she said. We're descending to 10,000. I'm diverting to Incheon. 32 minutes. We were supposed to land in Paris. We will. Tomorrow. After maintenance clears the aircraft. Another silence. Longer this time. She could picture him. She'd learned his silences the way you learn weather patterns when you live at altitude. Leaning back in that cream leather seat, jaw tight, one hand wrapped around a glass of whatever he hadn't been drinking because Choi Do-yoon didn't actually drink when he was thinking, he just held the glass like punctuation. You're not scared, he said. It wasn't a question. No. Why not? Aria checked her altimeter. 28,000. Smooth descent. Everything nominal except the thing that wasn't. Because being scared doesn't fix compressors, sir. The intercom clicked off. She landed the jet at Incheon 40 minutes later, 6 minutes ahead of her own estimate, in light crosswind with a touchdown so smooth the champagne flute on his side table didn't tip. She knew because she checked the cabin camera feed after power down the way she always did, not vanity procedure. Everything logged. Everything witnessed. What she didn't expect was for him to be standing in the cockpit doorway when she finished her shutdown checklist. She'd been his pilot for 4 months. In 4 months, Choi Do-yoon had never once walked into the cockpit. He was wearing a charcoal wool suit, and he was looking at her with an expression she couldn't name. Not quite respect, not quite surprise, something uncomfortably close to both. 4 months, he said. She unclipped her headset and set it precisely on the glare shield. Sir? I've had 3 pilots before you. In 4 months, not one of them landed in conditions like that without calling me twice to apologize in advance. He paused. You didn't call me once. Aria turned to look at him fully for the first time since she'd been hired. She was 27. He was 29. She'd known from the beginning that he was handsome. It would have been physically impossible not to notice, the same way you noticed a storm front building on the horizon, but she'd filed it under irrelevant the way she filed most things that didn't belong in a cockpit. Apologies don't fix compressors either, she said. Something shifted in his face. Just slightly. Like a door opening 1 inch and then catching on a chain. He turned and walked back into the cabin without another word. Aria watched the empty doorway for exactly 3 seconds. Then she went back to her checklist. She didn't know yet that those 3 seconds would cost her everything she'd decided she was. Annapolis, Maryland. 8 months earlier. The letter from Choi Aviation arrived on a Tuesday, which Aria would later decide was appropriate. Tuesdays were the most dishonest day of the week, pretending to be the beginning of something when Monday had already done all the hard work. She read it twice at her kitchen table, coffee going cold, still wearing the uniform from her morning charter flight out of BWI, a regional turboprop run she'd been doing for 3 years, good money, boring sky, the aviation equivalent of reading the same chapter over and over. Through the window, the Chesapeake was doing its silver thing in the distance, indifferent and beautiful. We would like to invite you to interview for the position of lead pilot, private aviation, Choi Group International. The role is Seoul-based with frequent international travel. Her phone rang before she finished. You're not going to take it. James's voice before hello. He had a habit of beginning conversations mid-argument, as though the arguing had started without her and she was just catching up. You read my mail? I saw the letterhead when you opened it on the counter this morning. Aria. Korea? You don't even. I speak 5 languages. Korean can be 6. This is about your career or about running away? She set the letter down. Looked at it. The Choi Group logo, a stylized crane in flight, minimalist, expensive looking. James? Don't? We've been done for 3 months. We've been complicated for 3 months. You've been complicated. I've been clear. She picked the letter back up. I'm going to interview. She heard him exhale, that long, theatrical exhale that she used to think meant he was processing something and now understood meant he was preparing to say something he'd already decided. You know what your problem is, Arya? You're always flying towards something instead of staying still long enough to build it. She thought about that for a moment. Genuinely thought about it the way she thought about everything, seriously, without rushing. Maybe, she said. Or maybe what you're calling still is what I'd call stuck. She hung up. Applied for the position. Got the interview. Got the job. What she found out later, much later, in the way you find out things that change the shape of a story you thought you already knew, was that she almost didn't. That Choi Dyun had looked at her file and said, with the particular flatness of someone who has never once been told no, find someone else. His director of operations, a meticulous woman named Park Soo-jin who had managed Choi Group's private aviation for 11 years and had survived 3 different Choi family crises with her hair immaculate, had put the file back on his desk and said, her credentials are the best we've reviewed. Type rated on the Global 7500. Former military, United States Air Force, 6 years, no incidents. 2 additional type ratings. ICAO English Level 6. She is, statistically, the safest choice. I don't need statistics. Respectfully, sir, that's exactly what you need after the Monaco incident. His jaw had tightened. Park Soo-jin was one of 4 people on Earth who could say things like that to him, and she knew it and she used it carefully. Like a scalpel, not a hammer. He'd taken the file back without another word. Arya got the call the next morning. She bought 3 Korean language learning applications before she'd finished packing. Seoul was a city that didn't let you be ordinary. It pushed, architecture and light and noise all conspiring to insist that you be present, that you pay attention, that you not make the mistake of assuming it was like anywhere else you'd been. Arya arrived in October when the city's leaves were doing something she'd never seen leaves do before. Burning gold and red against the Greyhound River, extravagant, unapologetic about it. She'd grown up watching the Chesapeake change seasons, but this was different. This city wore autumn like a declaration. She had 3 weeks before her first flight with Choi Dyun. She used them to learn the hangar operations, study the maintenance schedules, meet the 2 co-pilots who would rotate on longer routes, and eat her way through every Pojangmaka stall within walking distance of her apartment in Itaewon, which she'd chosen because it was international without being pretentious about it. She also learned from the co-pilots the unofficial rules. He doesn't talk on flights, said Kim Jae-won, 24 and newer to the operation than even Arya. Or he doesn't initiate. If he asks something, answer. If he doesn't, don't. He reads, offered the senior co-pilot Yoon Tae-sik, who had been with Choi Aviation 2 years and had the careful air of a man who knew exactly which doors not to open. Physical books. Never the same one twice. He leaves them on the aircraft sometimes. No one is sure if it's intentional. What happens when you find one? Arya asked. Tae-sik considered this. The first time I left it in the seat pocket. He said nothing. The second time I put it on the side table with a paper clip marking where I thought he'd stopped. Pause. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said, you guessed wrong. But he didn't sound angry. Arya filed this away. The first time she flew him, Seoul to Tokyo, 90 minutes, clear skies, the kind of flight that required competence but not creativity, she said exactly 6 words to him beyond the required safety briefing. Wheels up in 10, sir, and we've landed. That was it. She felt his eyes on the back of her head twice during the flight. Both times she'd been adjusting something. Once the autopilot altitude, once her headset, and both times she'd felt the gaze the way you feel a change in cabin pressure before the instruments confirm it. Something in the air going different. She didn't turn around. The months built on each other. Seoul to Tokyo. Seoul to Singapore. Seoul to Dubai. She flew him like she flew the aircraft, with total attention and no performance because performance in a cockpit was how you got killed. And then Paris. The compressor. The landing. And him standing in the cockpit doorway saying 4 months like it meant something. They made it to Paris 3 days after the diversion. New aircraft, the backup, a slightly smaller Challenger, and a route that Arya had recalculated twice for weather because an Atlantic depression was doing something inconvenient south of Iceland. Paris received them the way Paris receives everyone, with beauty so casual it bordered on insult. Arya had 2 days off while Choi Dyun conducted whatever meetings required him to be in Paris in November with a wardrobe that included a camel overcoat she happened to see as he walked through Charles de Gaulle and which she happened to think was the most perfectly cut piece of clothing she'd ever seen on a human being. She was not thinking about his coat. She was thinking about the aircraft's fuel logs. She went to the Musée d'Orsay alone, in dark jeans and a deep burgundy turtleneck and her white leather sneakers, hair natural and loose, silver hoops catching light. She ate cassoulet at a restaurant that had no English menu and ordered entirely in French and was unreasonably pleased with herself about it. She did not think about Choi Diyun. Except she did once standing in front of a Van Gogh. The Starry Night was in New York, but there was a smaller piece less famous, A Night Sky Over a Field, and thinking about the thing he'd said. You're not scared. Why not? And then thinking about how she'd answered. Because being scared doesn't fix compressors. And then, this was the part she examined and put down quickly, the way you put down a book that's getting too interesting at a time when you can't afford to be interested. Wondering if he'd asked because he had been scared. Not for himself. She filed that under irrelevant too and went to find the Impressionists. She was walking out of the museum when she nearly walked into him. He was alone, which surprised her. He was always preceded by at least one assistant and often a security consultant, but here he was solo, hands in the pockets of that camel coat, looking at the building's facade with the expression of someone who has more money than they will ever need and has somehow arrived, through the accumulation of it, at a form of loneliness so refined it looks like solitude. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. A beat. Two. The kind of pause that Parisian air seems designed to produce, weighted, charged, aware of its own cinematic potential. Captain Hamilton. Formal. Correct. His default register with her. Mr. Choi. Hers with him. Then he looked at the museum behind her. Were you just? Yes. I was going to. It's worth it. She meant it completely. The Van Gogh rooms especially. 3rd floor. He looked at her for a moment with that expression again, the door on the chain. Then he nodded once. Started past her. There's a small piece, she said to his shoulder, not turning around, not sure why she was still talking. Not the famous one. A field at night. If you find it, it's worth standing in front of for longer than feels comfortable. She walked away without waiting to see his reaction. She told herself it was because she didn't need to know. She thought about it for the entire cab ride back to the hotel. That night, a message came through the flight operations app, their official communication channel, bland and practical. The message was from him, which almost never happened. Logistics went through Park Soo-jin. Found it? You were right about the time. 4 words. 5 if you counted the contraction. She stared at her phone for longer than felt comfortable. Then she typed, "The night sky looks different when you stop trying to count the stars." She sent it before she could decide not to. His reply came 6 minutes later. Is that a philosophy or a flight instruction? She laughed, actually laughed in her empty hotel room in Paris at her phone, and typed, both. She should have known James would come to Seoul. James operated on the principle that the best way to win an argument was to physically relocate the argument to wherever you were. He arrived in February, 4 months after Paris, during the period when things between Arya and Choi Diyun had shifted into something that had no official name but occupied too much space to be nothing. There had been 3 more messages through the flight ops channel that had nothing to do with flights. There had been a moment in the hangar in December when he'd walked in while she was doing a pre-flight inspection in her overalls, grease on her forearm, hair pulled back with a pen, caught completely off guard, not in uniform, just herself, and he'd stopped walking and looked at her like he was recalculating something. There had been a New Year's Eve flight to Jeju Island for a Choi Group client event where she'd handed him a cup of coffee at the galley by complete accident. Soo-jin was off sick, the flight attendant was handling a passenger situation, and their fingers had touched around the cup and neither of them had moved for 1 full second before she stepped back and said, "Sir," and he said, "Thank you," and they both pretended it was nothing, very convincingly to themselves and no one else. James showed up at her Itaewon apartment on a Wednesday morning with a duffel bag and a reason. "My company has a Seoul office now," he said, standing in her doorway. Looking exactly like himself, tall, broad-shouldered, the easy handsomeness of a man who had always been looked at and knew exactly what to do with it. He was wearing a navy puffer jacket and his locks were freshly done and he looked like someone she had once been very certain about. 3-month placement. "James? I'm not here for you." He held up a hand. "I mean it, Arya. It's work. But I'm here and I thought. Come in." She stepped back. Because she was not cruel, and he was not nothing to her, and Seoul was, when you came down to it, far from home in ways that surprised her sometimes at night. He came in. He looked around her apartment. The aviation textbooks, the Korean vocabulary flashcards stuck to the refrigerator, the small framed photo of her and her mother at her Air Force graduation, the Annapolis skyline on a postcard she'd pinned above her desk. "You're happy here," he said, like it confused him. "Yes." "Is it the job or is it?" He stopped. Finished the sentence. "I heard things, Arya. People talk. About you and there's nothing to hear." Which was both completely true and completely insufficient. James sat down on her couch with the comfortable familiarity of someone who had once known the geometry of her life and assumed the blueprints hadn't changed. He's a billionaire, Arya. Korean. Conservative family. Do you know what that world looks like for someone like you? Someone like me, she said. Quietly. I'm not saying it the way it sounds. Then how are you saying it? He looked at her. The look of a man who is smart enough to know he's losing ground and stubborn enough to hold it anyway. I'm saying that the kind of man who flies private through 3 continents and hasn't had a single relationship that lasted past 6 months, I looked him up, is not the kind of man who's going to. James? She said it gently. Like a door closing, not slamming. What we had was real. It was also over. Those 2 things can both be true. He was quiet for a long time. I still think about you. I know. She sat across from him. I think that's why you're here. And I understand that. But it can't be why you stay. He left after an hour. He took his duffel bag. He looked back at her once from the doorway and she thought, not for the first time, not without some sadness, that James was a man who loved her the way people love places they've left, with genuine feeling and a fundamental misunderstanding of why they'd gone. She met them by accident, which was fitting because most things with Choi Deun happened sideways. It was March. A family dinner at the Choi residence, an architectural thing in Songbukdong that managed to be both traditional and aggressive about it, all wood and glass and courtyard garden with a plum tree that Deun had mentioned exactly once, on a flight over Manchuria, when the clouds below them had looked like blossoms. She'd been dropping off flight documents that Sujin needed signed before Monday, a small errand, 20 minutes, when the front door opened and a woman who could only be his mother emerged into the entryway and looked at Arya with the precise, measuring gaze of someone who had spent a lifetime assessing threats. Choi Myongjia was 61 and immaculate. Pearls, silk blouse, the posture of someone who had once been told they had remarkable bearing and had never forgotten it. She looked at Arya, in her off-duty clothes, natural hair loose, holding a manila envelope, with an expression that was not hostile exactly, but was very much a questionnaire. You are the pilot, she said. In English. Flawless. Yes, ma'am. Arya Hamilton. I apologize for intruding. I have documents for Mr. Choi. He is inside. Pause. You are American? Yes, ma'am. Maryland. A slight adjustment in the expression. Not warmer. More interested. My husband attended a conference at Johns Hopkins once. Baltimore. She stepped back from the door, not quite an invitation, not quite not. Come in. I'll tell him you're here. The entrance hall of the Choi house was the quietest expensive room Arya had ever stood in. No display. Just quality, the grain of the wood floor, the single celadon vase on the side table, the plum tree visible through the glass wall at the corridor's end. She was standing looking at the tree when she felt someone beside her. It wasn't Deun. It was a man she recognized from photographs, Choi Sang-hyun, 64, patriarch, founder of Choi Group, a man who had started with a small electronics trading company in 1987 and built it into something that now had stakes in everything from shipping to biomed. He was shorter than his son and heavier in the way of men who had once been very lean and had stopped caring about it, and he looked at the plum tree with her for a moment before he looked at her. Deun says you landed a pressurized aircraft failure alone, he said. No greeting. The directness of old men who have earned it. The co-pilot assisted with communications, she said. It was a team landing. He looked at her with something that might have been approval. He says you said I have it. When he asked how bad it was. The situation was manageable. He has never flown with a pilot who said I have it before. The old man's eyes, dark, dense, missing nothing, moved from the plum tree to her face. He has flown with pilots who apologized. Pilots who explained. Pilots who asked him what he wanted to do. Pause. You just had it. That's my job, sir. Sang-hyun nodded slowly. Then, without another word, turned and walked back into the house. Deun appeared in the corridor 30 seconds later, still in his dinner clothes, dark slacks, a simple black shirt, that particular effortlessness she'd stopped pretending she didn't notice. He saw her standing in his entrance hall, next to his father's favorite vase, and something in his face did the thing it had been doing more often lately, opened a little like a window when the weather finally changed. You met my father, he said. Briefly. What did he say? She handed him the envelope. He said you told him about the landing. She kept her voice professional. Correct. He took the envelope without looking at it. He was looking at her. I tell him about things that matter. The corridor was very quiet. I'll see myself out, she said. Arya. First name. Not Captain Hamilton. Her name in his voice, in that quiet house, which was already too much of several things. She stopped. My mother is going to invite you to dinner. He said it like a warning. I need you to know that I didn't arrange that. Okay. And I need you to know that if you want to decline, I completely understand and there will be no. Diyun. First time she'd used his name without the honorific. He went very still. I would like to come to dinner. She wore a deep green wrap dress that her best friend Nadia had shipped from a DC boutique with a note that said, wear this when you're nervous and want to look like you aren't. She wore her gold earrings, the large hoop ones her grandmother's from Baltimore, her version of armor. She wore her hair up. The Choi family dinner table was a masterclass in subtext. Myongja was precise and curious, asking questions with the structure of someone conducting a very elegant interview. The younger sister, Choi Ji-hai, 25, sharp, studying architecture at Yonsei, was the only one who simply talked to Arya like a person, asking about flight school and whether she'd seen the Han River from above. It bends like a sleeping woman, Arya said, and Ji-hai grabbed her arm with delight. The older brother, Choi Do-sik, 33, said very little and watched Diyun. Diyun, for his part, sat at the table and navigated his family like he navigated weather, reading it, adjusting, saying less than he felt and more than he showed. Except when he looked at Arya. Then the navigation stopped. He just looked. Myongja saw it. Of course she did. She had been looking for exactly that in her son's face for years and she recognized it the way you recognize a key fitting a lock. Whether she was pleased about it was a different conversation. After dinner, when Sang-hyun had retired and Ji-hai had dragged Arya to the garden to show her the plum tree up close and explain the family history of it in exhausting and wonderful detail, Myongja found Diyun in the kitchen making tea. She is not what I expected, his mother said. What did you expect? Someone more. A precise pause. Temporary. Diyun set down the kettle. She is the best pilot I have ever flown with. I'm not talking about piloting. He turned to look at his mother. In the kitchen light, face to face, they looked startlingly alike. Same jaw, same density of expression. I know, he said. Diyun. She said his name the way only she could, all the years of him in it. She is from a different world. So was Appa when you met him. Different world, different city, different family. That was different. Was it? The silence between them was old and complicated and threaded through with love, which made it worse. Be careful, his mother said finally. Of her. Of what you ask her to walk into. He picked up the tea. I'm always careful. No, she said quietly. You are always controlled. Those are different things. In the garden, under the plum tree, Arya listened to Ji-hai describe how her grandfather had planted it the year Diyun was born, and felt the specific vertigo of being in someone else's history and realizing you want to stay. He texted in April. Can we talk? Actually talk. I promise it's not. She called him before he finished. Because she was that kind of person. They met at a cafe in Itaewon, the kind of place that served both espresso and sake without embarrassment. He looked good. The sole placement was agreeing with him. He seemed less like someone who was trying to win something and more like someone who had recently put something down. I'm not here to ask you back, he said right away. I know. I just wanted to. He turned his coffee cup. Arya, I was a jerk to you for the last 8 months we were together and I spent a lot of time after telling myself a story where I wasn't. I'm tired of that story. She looked at him across the table. The James she'd fallen for at 23 in flight training at NAS Patuxent River in Maryland, when he'd corrected her simulator technique and she told him with great precision where he could put his correction, that James was still in there. He'd just gotten buried under the weight of being wrong about things and not knowing how to say so. Thank you, she said. And meant it. Is it him? He asked. Not accusatory. Genuinely asking the way people ask when they've already accepted the answer. It's complicated. You're smiling when you say something complicated. You never used to do that. She touched the corner of her mouth. Hadn't realized. He's. She searched for the right word and gave up. I don't know what he is yet. Well. James leaned back. He'd better be something. Because you are a lot, Arya Hamilton. In the best possible way. You are a whole lot of person and whoever gets to have you had better know that. She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers for a moment. Just a moment. You're going to be okay. I know. He smiled, real this time. So are you? You've always landed it. She laughed. He laughed. And somewhere in that cafe in Itaewon in the middle of Seoul, an old thing finished cleanly. The flight was a red-eye, Seoul to Helsinki, then repositioning to Stockholm, then Paris, a complicated week of European travel for a summit Diyun was attending as a keynote speaker. Night flights were different. Lower traffic, cooler skies, the world below reduced to networks of light that looked, from altitude, like something breathing. She was 2 hours into the Helsinki leg when his voice came through the intercom. Not the usual call button press, the cockpit voice channel, direct. Are you awake? He asked. I'm flying your plane, she said. So yes. Right. Pause. Obviously. Another pause. She could hear him recalibrating. I couldn't sleep. Would you like the... No. I don't want anything. I just... A longer pause than any she'd heard from him. Diyun, who was never at a loss for the controlled version of words, at 3 a.m. over the Baltic at a loss. I don't know why I pressed the button. She checked the altimeter. Checked the fuel. Checked every instrument the way she always did. Then she said, "What are you reading?" A surprised beat. Dostoevsky. The Idiot. Which part? Nastasia Filipovna is burning the money. That's my favorite scene. You've read it? I've read everything on the aircraft bookshelf, she said. I read them in flight order. Your copy has margin notes. The longest pause yet. You read my margin notes. You write in pencil. Very lightly. It's almost like you don't want anyone to see them. Silence. Then, what did you think of what I wrote? She considered. I thought they were written by someone who understands what it costs to want things. The intercom stayed open. She could hear him breathing. She watched the stars, different configurations this far north, Polaris sitting unusually high, and let the silence be what it was. Aria. Soft. No title. Yes. When we land in Paris. Would you? He stopped. Restarted. I know that the position is... Diyun. She said it without thinking. Ask. A breath. Would you have dinner with me? Not in any official, just dinner. She looked at the stars for one long moment. At Polaris, honest and fixed. Yes, she said. Below them, the Baltic Sea held its cold dark shape, and the aircraft moved through clean air, and nothing was the same as it had been 2 minutes ago. Dinner was at a restaurant she'd never have found alone, tucked into a courtyard off the Marais, 12 tables, no menu, whatever the chef had decided that day. He'd reserved it under a different name. No assistants. No security. Just Diyun in dark jeans and a white shirt, looking almost shockingly like a person. She wore gold earrings. She'd gone back and forth about the earrings for 20 minutes and then put them on because she was not going to be small on her own behalf. He stood up when she walked in. She didn't expect that. They talked for 4 hours. Not about flight. Not about the company. About everything that had been accumulating under the professional surface of them. His time studying business in London and hating it and loving the access to museums. Her years in the Air Force, the bases in Virginia and Germany, the first time she flew solo at night and felt like she'd cracked the code of something permanent. Growing up in Annapolis, the Naval Academy town, where she'd watched military aircraft from the time she could walk and decided at age 9 that she would fly one. His brother Dusick and the pressure of inheritance. Her mother in Maryland who called every Sunday and prayed over the phone without asking permission. The margin notes. The Van Gogh. The plum tree. Jihai told me your grandfather planted it the year you were born, she said. He looked at his wine. He said, this is the kind of thing old Korean men say. He said, now there's something that will outlast all of us. He was talking about the tree. My father always thought he was talking about me. Which did you think? I thought he was talking about trees. Pause. A real smile. Not the controlled public version, the actual one which was slightly crooked and did something catastrophic. I'm starting to think it was both. He walked her back to the hotel through the Marais. Paris at midnight, April, the kind of air that doesn't exist anywhere else. They walked side by side, not touching, until they weren't not touching, and then they were, hands finding each other somewhere around the Rue de Francs-Bourgeois, and neither of them acknowledged it, and neither of them let go. At the hotel entrance, he turned to her. I need to tell you, he said, that when your file came to me, I said no. She looked at him. I know. He blinked. How? Park Soo-jin told me. 6 months ago. I asked her why there was a 2-week gap between my interview and the offer. She paused. Why are you telling me this now? Because I want you to know that I was wrong. And I want you to know exactly when I was wrong, so there's no ambiguity in what I'm saying to you right now. Which is that I don't know what this is yet, but I know I want to find out. And I know that whatever it becomes, it begins honestly. No ambiguity. She looked at him in the Paris doorway light, this complicated, controlled, quietly wanting man who wrote Dostoevsky notes in pencil and had been scared on that aircraft. She was sure of it now, not for himself. No ambiguity, she said. He kissed her the way the best kisses work. Not a beginning, more like a recognition. Like something that was already true getting finally said aloud. Jeju Island. November. 1 year and 7 months after Paris. He'd brought her there for a weekend. Their weekends had become a quiet rebellion against the schedule, small pockets of ordinary in lives that didn't do ordinary, and they were walking the All Trail at sunset, the volcanic rock black under orange sky, the sea doing its ancient indifferent thing below the cliffs. She was wearing a cream linen set and her white sneakers and a rust-colored scarf he'd brought back from a solo trip to Morocco because the color looked like something you'd wear. She still had that scarf. She'd told him it was impractical and worn it approximately every third day. She was looking at the sea when he stopped walking. She turned. He was crouched on one knee on the Jeju stone path, which was not a planned romantic gesture so much as a man who had been working up to a question for 3 weeks and had run out of time for choreography. In his hand, a ring. Simple. A solitaire in a narrow band, the stone dark, alexandrite, which changed color in different light, which she understood immediately and completely was not a coincidence. I practiced a speech, he said. 14 versions. I deleted all of them. He looked up at her with the expression she'd learned to love most, the one where the door came all the way off the chain. You are the only person who has ever made me feel that landing was as brave as flying. I want to spend the rest of my life in that feeling. She looked at the ring. At the stone that shifted between green and purple in the failing light. At the man who had once said find someone else and had been so entirely wrong about it and had told her so, honestly, in Paris in a doorway before he asked for anything. Choi Do-yoon, she said. Yes. You're kneeling on volcanic rock in your good pants. Yes. That's going to leave marks. I know. Then yes, she said. Obviously yes. He put the ring on her hand. It changed color in the sunset. He stood up and she walked into him and they stood on the Jeju cliff path with the ocean making its argument below them, and the sky went dark gold around them, and the stone held both their weight. The wedding took place in Seoul in April, cherry blossom season, Ji-hye's insistence, which no one had the heart to argue because she was right about the aesthetics and also about most other things. It was 2 ceremonies back to back, which had been Arya's mother's non-negotiable. My child does not get married once in a language I don't speak, said Dr. Gloria Hamilton, Annapolis, Maryland, over a video call, with the particular authority of a woman who had raised a fighter pilot and was not about to be outmaneuvered by logistics. Gloria arrived in Seoul with Arya's Aunt Cheryl and 2 cousins and enough personality to recalibrate the entire Choi household. She was 60, with natural hair going silver, a laugh that occupied whole rooms, and an immediate, disarming warmth that had Sang-hyun, within 40 minutes of their first dinner, telling her the story of the plum tree with more feeling than he'd shown in years. Myung-ja, who had been prepared to be gracious, found herself actually charmed, which she experienced as something between delight and affront. Ji-hye took Cheryl shopping on Garo-Sagil the day before the wedding and they came back with identical silk scarves and a developing friendship that everyone agreed was slightly alarming. The Korean ceremony was at the family home, in the courtyard, under the plum tree in full bloom, the petals doing what petals do in April in Korea, falling with such specific beauty it feels composed. Arya wore a hanbok in deep indigo and gold. She'd been fitted for it 3 times, had learned to tie the Atgorium knot herself with Ji-hye's instruction and 3 practice sessions. And when she walked into the courtyard in it, with her gold earrings catching the April light, Do-yoon's expression did something that Ji-hye immediately photographed because she understood it was something that happened exactly once. The Western ceremony was the following afternoon, exchanging vows in English in a garden venue near Bukhansan, with Gloria crying loudly and unapologetically in the front row and Sang-hyun sitting next to her and handing her his handkerchief and somehow ending up patting her hand through the idos. The vows. Arya had written hers in the cockpit of a grounded aircraft at dawn, which felt correct. She said, I have been trained to respond to emergencies without panic. To trust instruments. To believe that pressure problems are solvable if you stay in your seat and keep your hands on the controls. You are the one thing in my life that I didn't train for. And I have never been so glad to be unprepared. Do-yoon said, I told them to find someone else. I was wrong. I have been wrong about things before. I have never been so grateful to have been wrong. Gloria Hamilton said, Amen loudly into the ceremony, and even Myung-ja smiled. The reception was a collision of 2 worlds that turned out to fit better than anyone had arranged. A DJ who moved between KR&B and Afrobeats between the formal courses. A dessert table that held both Teok and Arya's grandmother's sweet potato cake, made from the original Baltimore family recipe by Aunt Cheryl. Toasts in 3 languages, one from Ji-hye that was so funny Sang-hyun had to set down his glass. And sometime around midnight, the entirely improbable sight of Gloria Hamilton and Choi Myung-ja sitting together at a corner table, shoes off, comparing photographs of their respective children at ages that should never be shown publicly, laughing. Do-yoon found Arya at the edge of the dance floor watching this. Your mother, he said. I know. My mother is showing her embarrassing photographs. I know. She has them too. It will be mutual destruction. They'll be best friends by Thursday. He put his arm around her and she leaned into him, and they watched their mothers build something unanticipated, and the cherry blossoms had mostly fallen by now, petals on the reception floor, on every surface in everyone's hair, the air smelling of spring and something beginning. The pregnancy announcement came on a Tuesday. Arya had always distrusted Tuesdays and now she reconsidered. She'd known for 3 days. She told no one. She'd taken 4 tests because she was a pilot and pilots verify redundantly, and then she'd sat on the bathroom floor in their apartment in Songbukdong and had a conversation with herself that lasted approximately 40 minutes and covered all the practical territory: her license, the flight status regulations, the timeline, the conversation with Diyun, the call to her mother, and then, when all the practical was handled, she allowed herself to feel it, the enormous, vertiginous, undeniable yes of it. She told him that evening. She handed him the test. He looked at it. He looked at her. And then Choi Diyun, who was controlled about almost everything, who kept his feelings like margin notes in pencil, light, deniable, sat down on the couch and put his face in his hands and made a sound she'd never heard from him before. She sat next to him and put her hand on his back. "Good," she said. He looked up. His eyes were wet, which she was going to honor forever by pretending she hadn't noticed and simultaneously never forgetting. "I've never," he stopped. "Tried again. I didn't know I wanted this until just now. That's how it works sometimes." He took her hand. Held it the way you hold something you're afraid of dropping. "Are you scared?" She thought about it. "No." He laughed, surprised, the real laugh, the slightly crooked one. "Why not?" She looked at him. "Because being scared doesn't." "Don't say it." She said it. "Fix compressors." He pulled her into him and they stayed like that for a long time, on their couch in their apartment in Songbukdong, with the city making its noise outside and the plum tree in the courtyard 2 streets over already thinking about blooming again. Gloria screamed when Arya called. Actually screamed, the kind that meant joy so large it had to become sound. Myongjia, when told the following week at a family dinner, set down her chopsticks with precise deliberateness and then looked at her son and said simply, "Good." And then looked at Arya with something that had taken over a year to become what it now was: warm, real, chosen. "Good," she said again to her. The baby came in late November, which in Seoul meant the first cold, the air gone clean and sharp, the Han River gray and beautiful. They named her Choi Haewon, meaning grace, meaning the sea. Arya's contribution was her middle name, Gloria, which needed no translation and required none. She was small and furious about existing, loud in her initial objections to the world, and then, when placed on Arya's chest, immediately quiet, as though she'd recognized something fundamental and decided to accept the terms. Diyun held her and looked the way he'd looked on the Jeju cliff, the door entirely off its hinges, nothing behind it but the actual man, unhidden. His father came to the hospital and stood in the doorway of the room for a long moment before entering. He looked at his granddaughter with the expression of someone encountering something they hadn't known they'd been waiting for. "She looks like the tree when it's about to bloom," he said, which was not a thing that made logical sense and was exactly right. Gloria arrived from Maryland 3 days later. I already had the ticket, and took over the apartment with a warmth so total that Diyun found himself actually resting in her presence for the first time since the birth, which he hadn't known he needed and which he thanked her for, awkwardly, the way someone thanks someone for a gift they received without knowing they'd asked. "Baby," Gloria said to him, patting his face with the easy authority of a Maryland woman who had decided he was hers now. "Your family. You don't thank family, Bolly." Haewon is 8 months old. She has her father's jaw and her mother's eyes and her own entirely distinct personality, which presents mainly as curiosity and a firm conviction that everything within reach belongs to her. They are on a private terrace at a resort in Ubud, the rice terraces below them going gold in the late afternoon, the air warm and thick with something flowering. Haewon is on the mat between them, examining a plastic measuring spoon with the focus of a scientist. Arya is not flying right now, maternity leave extended. She will go back. She has already chosen her return date, already spoken to the new co-pilot, already reviewed the updated maintenance logs on the Global 7500. She is a pilot. She will always be a pilot. Diyun has never once suggested otherwise, which is one of approximately 1,000 things she doesn't take for granted. He is reading. The idiot again. She's noticed he returns to it the way some people return to places. He has fresh margin notes. She will read them later. She always does. "What do you write?" she asked him once, "when you're marking a passage?" "Questions," he said. "Things I don't understand yet." She thinks about this often. Haewon drops the measuring spoon and objects loudly to its absence. They both reach for it at the same time, their hands colliding above the mat, and Diyun looks at Arya with that expression. The original one, the one from the hangar, the one from the Paris doorway, the one from the Jeju cliff. The door completely open. She hands him the spoon. He gives it to their daughter. Haewon receives it with the satisfaction of someone who has always known the world would provide. Above them, a bird makes a long arc across the Balinese sky, ease and altitude, the specific grace of something that has never doubted it belongs up there. Arya watches it. She is not scared. She never is when she's already landed.
Thank you for watching this video from the beginning to the end. Hope you enjoyed the story. Let me know your views in the comment section. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you in my next video.